King of German Mercenaries, by Taishang Laonyo.
Chapter 1, The Unlucky Wandering Knight. Marin was very depressed. He was playing Europa Universals at home. He had finally become the Holy Roman Emperor and was having a great time, but then his buddy Li Liang called him for help and asked him to help fight. As for the cause of the incident, it was because Li Liang went out to set up a stall at night and had a conflict with a group of thugs over a stall site dispute. Then, Li Liang was beaten. Li Liang was naturally dissatisfied, so he called a few friends to get back at him. Marin was tall and strong, agile, and had learned military grappling and fighting from a retired soldier when he was a child. Naturally, he was the first divine beast to be summoned by Li Liang. Marin had just swept across the entire Holy Roman Empire in the game and became an emperor worshipped by thousands of people. He was very excited at the moment, so without saying a word, he happily rode his second-hand electric bicycle to uphold justice on Earth. After the brothers arrived, Li Liang promised to treat everyone to hot pot after the event, and each person would have a pack of good cigarettes, and then the atmosphere became lively. Led by the big guy Marin, the brothers found a few young yellow-haired people who were still setting up stalls. Then, like a knight, Marin spread his legs and launched a horseless charge. The yellow-haired guys were indeed weaklings, and they had only beaten Li Liang up by relying on their numbers. Under the charge led by the knight Marin, the yellow-haired guys were quickly beaten to a pulp. But Marin was too proud to be in control, and rushed forward without noticing the danger behind him. Then, a sinister brick appeared behind Marin's head. Then, Knight Ma was hit on the back of his head with a brick and lost consciousness. Sure enough. A brick breaks martial arts. Even gods can't stop it. This was Marin's last thought, after a long, long time, who knows how long. Marin finally woke up, but he felt something was wrong. Because when he opened his eyes, he did not see the white walls and soft lights of the hospital, nor did he see the scene of his rental house. Because he clearly smelled the green smell of grass. Fuck you. Li Liang, you bastard. I got hurt while standing up for you, but you actually left me in the wild without even sending me to the hospital. Damn it, I'm going to break up with you. Marin cursed and tried to get up, but he suddenly realized that this childish voice didn't seem to be his own, but it was indeed his. Marin, who has read many time travel novels, is naturally familiar with this plot. Could it be? Could it be? Is it time travel? Marin quickly stretched out his hand, and at the same time scanned the part of himself that he could see. Then, he saw a green body, a strange outfit, and a pair of snow-white hands that were obviously not his own. Suddenly, Marin's heart tightened. Could he have traveled through time and space and become a woman? Some time ago, the TV series, Go Princess Go, was very popular, and he was very afraid that he would travel through time and space and become a woman. If he became a woman, and was pressed down by a man in the future. Marin's hair stood on end, and he didn't dare to think about it. With a nervous mood, he skillfully directed the fifth girl on the left to reach down to the lower part. After a while, Marin felt relieved. He was still a man, probably because he had traveled through time and space to become a boy. Because the hair down there hadn't grown out yet. With his mind relaxed and a strong feeling of hunger coming over him, Marin fainted again. After a long time, Marin woke up from hunger. At the same time, a memory merged with Marin's consciousness. Obviously, it was the memory of the original owner of this body. By reading the memory, Marin learned that the original owner of this body was also called Marin. Of course, it was not the Chinese Marin, but the Western Marin. To be more precise, it was a young wandering knight named Marin Hoffmann in Germany at the end of the 15th century. What is a wandering knight? First of all, this is a knight, mostly an apprentice knight, who usually has a warhorse, a lance, and a set of knight armor. Some knights have horse armor on their warhorses, which is basic equipment. In addition, all knights have basically received strict training since childhood, are good at charging on horseback, and are also familiar with close combat, and are generally much better than ordinary people. In the Middle Ages and Renaissance in Europe, knights were the lowest level of feudal lords in Europe. Above them were barons, viscounts, earls, marquises, dukes, princes, kings, and emperors. However, not every knight was lucky enough to be granted a fief, because a knight had to fight for a higher level lord in order to have a chance to obtain a fief. Moreover, the knights' fiefdoms were usually small, about the size of one or several villages. For example, the family of this wandering knight named Marin, the Hoffmann family, was a small knight family under the Mark state in the Ruhr River region. This family only owned a small village with a small amount of arable land, and all the arable land added up to only 100 eugrams, an ancient Roman unit of area. In the Middle Ages, 1 eugram was equivalent to about 2 acres, equivalent to 12 acres. In other words, the Hoffman family only had 1,200 acres of land. 1,200 acres of land, doesn't it seem like a lot? In the Ming dynasty of the same period, it would definitely be enough to make a family well-fed and well-clothed. However, thanks to the unfortunate, agricultural production was so low that it was touching. The Hoffman family's 1,200 acres of land, excluding the 600 acres of fallow, Europeans practiced a rotation farming system, and cultivated land was generally left fallow for 1 year every 2 or 3 years to restore the soil fertility. Until modern times, this tradition still exists in rural areas of Europe and the United States, only produced 100,000 pounds of rye per year on the remaining 600 acres, Cologne pounds, 1 Cologne mark equals 233.85 grams, 1 Cologne pound equals 2 marks equals 467.7 grams. On average, the rye yield per acre was only 166.7 pounds, equivalent to about 156 kilograms. This was still a bumper year. If there was a famine, the yield would be even lower, and the yield per acre could drop to about 100 kilograms. This yield per mu is really touching. No wonder thousands of people starved to death in the German region during the Middle Ages. There is something even more amazing. The wheat yield per mu in this era is even more touching. A large estate near Hoffman Estate has a wheat yield of less than 100 kilograms per mu. Damn, as a top student in the history department, the time traveler Marin knows very well that since the Han Dynasty, the per acre yield of wheat in China has been stable at around 200 caddies. In the Ming Dynasty, the per acre yield of rice in Jiangnan could even reach around 500 caddies. The key to the problem, Marin knew from reading various time travel novels, it was because Westerners did not know how to use manure. For a very long time, Westerners did not know how to fertilize the land. They just dug the land, sowed seeds, and watered it. Then, they did other things. Even the serfs did not know how to pull out weeds. As for feces, people in medieval Europe basically urinated and defecated everywhere, which made the city full of feces and a foul smell. This also led to flies flying around and diseases spreading everywhere. The Black Death that broke out several times in the Middle Ages was inseparable from the poor sanitary environment in Europe at that time. In the East at the same time, farmers even pushed dung carts to collect dung in the city to use as fertilizer for farmland, and there were children who carried baskets to pick up dung balls. The feces of the Chinese people were all deposited in the fields, which led to the high yield of ancient Chinese agriculture and supported the prosperity of Chinese civilization. The feces of Europeans were all over the city, breeding a large number of flies and causing various diseases to rage in Europe. Well, Marin felt that he was overthinking. The reason why his predecessor in this body became a wandering knight was a tradition of the Germans. Since the establishment of the primogeniture system in Europe, the other sons of the nobles have suffered. The eldest son takes everything, and the other sons can only watch their eldest brother take everything. If it was a noble family, the situation was better. For example, although the king's other sons had no inheritance rights, the king's family was large and he could enfeoff his other sons as dukes, earls, etc., so that they could own their own territory and continue to enjoy the good life. The dukes, earls and other nobles had large enough territories, so they could also give some meat to their other sons. The little nobles were unlucky. Their family had very little land, just enough for the eldest son's family. If they gave some to the younger brothers, they would all be left with nothing. For example, the Hoffman family had 1,200 acres of thin land, and the output was barely enough to support the eldest son's family, not only food, but also war horses, purchase and repair weapons and armor, and servants, which was very expensive. It would be absolutely unaffordable to support Marin Hoffman and several other brothers and sisters. Therefore, the smallest feudal lords in the German region, the knights, were forced to make a decision. When the sons other than the eldest son came of age, they would give him a war horse, a set of armor and a lance, and let him make a living on his own. As for daughters, some poor nobles even sent their daughters to monasteries to become nuns in order to save dowries. Generally speaking, the descendants of these driven-out knight families chose to join the great nobles, such as serving as the nobles' bodyguards or fighting for the great feudal lords. Of course, not every knight who was driven out of his home had the opportunity to find a noble employer who appreciated him. Many knights who could not find a job had to wander around, looking for opportunities to be employed temporarily. Thus, a new group emerged, wandering knights. These wandering knights grew up in knight families and received strict martial arts training. They were very good on and off the horse. It was no problem for one of them to beat 2 or 3 ordinary strong men. Some strong men could fight a group of bandits alone on horseback. In fact, these wandering knights were the earliest mercenaries. However, they were all individual men who sought opportunities to serve the nobles and wealthy as individuals, and did not form a group. It was not until a few years ago that Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, saw the powerful fighting power of the Swiss mercenary corps composed of Swiss mountain people in the war for the Burgundy region, and then he began to think about recruiting mercenaries in the German region under his rule. The famous German mercenaries in later generations also began to officially appear during this period. Note, Maximilian I, Holy Roman Emperor, was not crowned by the Pope in Rome until 1508, and officially became the Holy Roman Emperor. Before that, Maximilian I's title of emperor was actually self-proclaimed, and only the people of the Holy Roman Empire recognized it. Without the coronation of the Pope, foreigners only recognized Maximilian I as the King of Germany. However, in 1508, Pope Julius II not only officially crowned Maximilian I, but also allowed the subsequent emperors of the Holy Roman Empire to not come to Rome for the coronation, but to find an archbishop in their own country to crown themselves. It is 1494, the time when Emperor Maximilian I is recruiting soldiers for war. Marin Hoffmann's father, Frings Hoffmann, heard that the emperor was recruiting mercenaries. Maximilian I had already recruited a group in 1487, so he decided to drive his second son, Marin Hoffmann, who was only 16 years old, out of the house in advance and make him go to the emperor and become a mercenary for the emperor. Originally, according to tradition, Marin would not be kicked out of the house until he turned 18. But old Hoffmann thought that the emperor was recruiting people, and it was a rare opportunity. If he made military achievements, he might even get a noble title and a fiefdom. So he decided to let Marin go to the emperor early. However, he overestimated his second son's experience in the underworld. Not long after leaving home, the only 10 gold coins that Marin Hoffmann had on him for travel expenses were swindled away by a liar who claimed to know the emperor's chief guard. Then, poor Marlin Hoffmann had no money to stay in a hotel or eat. In desperation, he had to ride a horse to go hunting in the wild. On the one hand, the meat of the prey could satisfy his hunger, and the fur of the prey could also be exchanged for some money as travel expenses. But Marin Hoffmann is a knight, not a hunter. So, little Marin can't catch any prey at all. Can you imagine a knight in heavy armor, holding a knight's lance, chasing and poking a running little rabbit? The heavy armor itself would reduce the speed and agility of the horses, so how could they catch up with the wild animals? The slow-running wild animals had already been hunted down. Little Malin had no crossbow and didn't know how to shoot arrows. So he could only continue to ride his horse and chase the animals on an empty stomach. Finally, after 2 days of not eating, the hungry and dizzy little Malin accidentally fell off his horse while chasing a deer and fainted in the grass. Then, he was traveled by the Chinese Malin in the future. Chapter 2 Survival First. When Marin sorted out these memories, he was also extremely anxious about the IQ of his predecessor. Little Marin, you are a heavy armored knight, chasing a deer, which even light cavalry may not be able to do, it is really. Suddenly, Marin thought, could this guy have swapped souls with my 21st century self? Thinking of this, he shuddered. If such a guy with such an impressive IQ were to travel back in time to his original body, in the 21st century where there are so many scammers, wouldn't he be swindled out of his underwear? But then again, I think that I can't go back now. What does Marin's body in the 21st century have to do with my current self? As for his parents in the future, Malin was not worried. Because he still had an older brother and an older sister. This was all thanks to the fact that Malin's hometown was in the countryside, and his parents had low awareness and refused to implement family planning at the time, and gave birth to 3 children at once. Otherwise, if the only son was gone, they would definitely be devastated, and there would be no one to take care of them in their old age. However, it was certain that the 2 old people would be sad. After all, rural people love their youngest the most. As he was thinking, he felt hungry again. Marin finally remembered that this body hadn't eaten for more than 2 days. Struggling to stand up, Marin saw his long and heavy knight's lance and a stupid warhorse grazing leisurely not far away on the edge of the grass where he fell. This warhorse named Karl was chosen by old Hoffmann for Marlin when he was young. Since he was 13 years old, the original Marlin has been feeding, shoveling manure and brushing the horse every day to cultivate his relationship for 3 years. So, after Marin fell unconscious on the ground, Karl did not walk away, but stopped and ate grass on the spot. Horses can eat grass to satisfy their hunger, but humans cannot. Marlin, who was so hungry that his eyes were dizzy, had to face the challenge of hunger first. At this time, he was still wearing a 15-kilogram breastplate and helmet. This was the maximum limit that the Hoffmann family could put together. After all, the Hoffmann family was also very poor, and they only had one complete set of Gothic plate armor, which was worn alternately by old Hoffmann and Adler. In addition, there was a Gothic breastplate and helmet, but no pants or boots. As for the warhorse Karl, he did not have iron horse armor, but a simple horse armor made of oak, which was painted with a layer of black paint. It looked like real horse armor, but it was actually fake. However, this kind of wooden horse armor can also withstand some not-so-heavy attacks to a certain extent, at least better than nothing. The feeling of hunger continued to hit Marlin's nerves, reminding him that it was time to eat. But where can I find something to eat now? Marin was helpless. He had not eaten for 2 days in this body he traveled through. He had inherited the riding and martial arts learned by the original owner. In addition, he knew some grappling and fighting techniques of later generations, so his fighting ability was not bad. But the problem was that he had no strength without eating. At this moment, any ordinary strong man could knock him down. Are we going to kill the horses to fill our stomachs? Marin looked at Karl, who was still leisurely eating grass. Karl seemed to sense something and glanced at Marin. No, I'm a wandering knight now. Can a knight still be called a knight without a warhorse? You know, medieval knights basically regarded warhorses as their second life. Therefore, whether it was killing horses or learning from Qin Qiong to sell horses, Marin ruled it out. But I'm really hungry. Marlin was about to cry. Looking at the idiot Karl eating grass with his head down, Marlin licked his lips and said, maybe, I can eat some grass to fill my stomach first. Thinking of the special forces in later generations who ate everything raw during field survival training, Marin resolutely decided to challenge himself. Then, he walked up to Karl and started to fight with the warhorse Karl for grass. Why did Mao compete with horses for grass? Because, according to books, horses are very picky herbivores. They eat grass, and it is said that they generally only like to eat tender, juicy grass. Horses generally refuse to eat grass that tastes bad unless they are very hungry. Seeing that Karl deduced that the grass Karl was eating must be delicious. Then, in front of Karl's confused look, he pulled out a few blades of grass that Karl had not chewed before and stuffed them into his mouth. Ugh, it's so disgusting. You idiot, why are you enjoying it so much? Marlin was angry and glared at Karl, while Karl snorted and continued to eat grass nonchalantly. The grass in front of me is indeed delicious, but that is for herbivores. As for humans, who the hell told you to eat grass? No matter what kind of grass it is, it has a green and astringent taste. When Marin ate the grass just now, a green and astringent taste immediately came out of his mouth. The feeling was a bit like eating green tea leaves that had been soaked in water. After spitting out the grass in his mouth, Marlin remembered that the Red Army seemed to eat tree bark and grass roots when they crossed the grassland, and there was no record of eating grass leaves. So he pulled out the grass roots and started eating them instead. The taste of grass roots was indeed better than that of grass leaves, at least the strange smell was much less. The green color on the grass leaves was actually the source of the green taste. The grass roots obviously had no green taste. Then, Marin ate a lot of grass roots in one breath. After that, he took out the copper pot, filled it with water from the nearby stream, and drank it. After resting for a while, and with the energy from the food, Marin finally recovered a lot of his strength. Then, he began to think about the next survival issue. Both the former knight Marin and the modern Marin are very principled people. Therefore, Marin is unwilling to learn from those degenerate wandering knights and rob people on the road. Therefore, he has only two choices, either to hunt for a living or to go back to Hoffman Manor for help. However, Marin was a little afraid that the old Hoffman couple would find out that he was a fake, and then inform the church to arrest him and burn him to death. These days, the church doesn't need evidence to burn people alive, it's enough for people to suspect you. So, after thinking about it, hunting for a living is the only option at the moment. In fact, there is a third option. For example, you can choose to find a great lord to pledge allegiance to. However, Marin, who is only 16 years old, is still developing physically and is not tall and strong enough. His current height is only about 1.7 meters, which is considered good among ordinary Germans of this era. But among German knights, he is a little short and thin. Because ordinary people of this era are malnourished, they are naturally shorter. But the children of the knight family are well nourished since childhood, and with their genetic genes, they are generally not short. The nobles were particular about pomp and circumstance, and liked to show off with a group of tall, strong, muscular men. His current physique made it difficult for others to take notice of him. Perhaps only the emperor who was eager to recruit mercenaries to work for him would recruit Marin. After all, Marin was from a knight family, and his combat power was much stronger than that of ordinary mercenaries from the bottom of society. Finally, Marin decided to rely on hunting to earn food and money for travel, and then go to Vienna to join Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor. At this time, the Italian War had already started, and the battle between the Holy Roman Empire and France in Italy was about to begin. Therefore, he had a great chance to stand out with the various military techniques he learned online in the 21st century, and maybe even become a noble. Chapter 3 Hunting. Marin knows how to shoot arrows. He was a hunting enthusiast in his previous life. Since guns were banned in China in later generations, Marin had no choice but to learn the skill of archery. Moreover, in his previous life, Marin had made an English longbow by himself. With this bow and arrows made by a blacksmith, he went into the forest behind his hometown many times and hunted many birds. The animals had been wiped out by the predecessors who used hunting rifles before the gun ban, and hares. Of course, in the Middle Ages, bows and arrows were also very important weapons, and they were very expensive. To make an English longbow, apart from the cost of materials, it would take at least 2 or 3 months just to train the bow. Therefore, Marin had no time to make an English longbow, nor did he have the money to buy the materials to make it. However, in his previous life, Marin also learned another hunting skill, setting traps. As long as the camouflage is clever, sensitive animals will be deceived and step into the trap. After all, animals are animals, and they often pay attention to the movements around them so that they can escape at the first opportunity. They put too much energy into watching all directions and listening in all directions, but often ignore the dangers under their feet. As long as the trap is realistically arranged, it can basically deceive most animals. Of course, the premise is that those animals happen to run to the ground where the trap is located. Marin observed that he was currently in a forest on the Rhine River in Germany. There was a stream in the forest with plenty of water. Marin, who has watched many episodes of Animal World, knows that many animals, especially herbivores, like to run to the river to drink water in the morning. Some beasts also like to ambush small animals drinking water by the river in the morning. However, there are no tigers or lions in Europe, only forest wolves are considered to be difficult beasts. But wolves are nocturnal animals and will not come out in the morning. Therefore, there is no danger for herbivores by the river in the morning. Marin rode back and forth along the stream several times and dismounted many times to observe the footprints and feces of animals on the ground. He finally identified 3 places where animals drank water more frequently. The terrain along the river in these 3 places is relatively flat and there are few trees. The reason why herbivores choose such places is that it is convenient for drinking water and escaping. Even if people or wild animals want to ambush them, they can be discovered from a distance. After choosing a good location, the next step is to set up a trap. Unfortunately, Marin didn't have a shovel or pickaxe to dig a pit. Strictly speaking, there are not many iron farm tools in Western Europe. In many manors, such as Hoffman Manor, a considerable part of the farm tools used by serfs are made of pure wood. Only in Italy, England and other regions with more developed metallurgy, and other relatively wealthy regions, iron farm tools are popular. As for using copper as farm tools, that's really a joke. Because copper was relatively scarce in Europe at that time. Before the development of the Falen copper mine in Sweden and the introduction of Japanese copper by the Dutch, the value of copper was still relatively high, and the exchange rate with silver was about 15:1, which was quite expensive. Therefore, using copper as farm tools requires real local tyrants. Since Marin was defrauded of all his money, he was now a 24K poor man, and it was impossible for him to buy metal farm tools. Therefore, he could only find a tree in the Black Forest, and with the short knife he carried with him, he laboriously cut off a forked branch and made a simple wooden pickaxe. Then, he used this wooden pickaxe to laboriously start digging traps. How much effort is required to dig the soil with wooden farm tools? It is quite laborious to dig the pickaxe into the soil. Fortunately, we are near the river, where the soil is moist and soft. Otherwise, this wooden pickaxe would not be able to dig up anything. As for the large amount of soil dug out from the pit, it is easy to deal with it. Just throw it into the river. After digging the pit, it was time to cover the surface of the pit. The camouflage had to be natural, otherwise sensitive herbivores would not be fooled. Marin quickly went to the forest to find a lot of dead branches, put them on the pit, and then carefully covered the dead branches with the whole piece of grass he had just dug out. After half a day of hard work, Marin finally set up the first trap, ran around to observe, and found that there were no loopholes, so he left with satisfaction. Then, he set up 2 deep pit traps in 2 other places using the same method. Then, as it was getting dark, he rode out of the Black Forest. You know, there are a lot of wolves in the forest these days. Wolves come out at night to look for meat. If Marin stayed in the forest overnight, he and Karl might become the wolf's midnight snack. So, Marin found a small town, tied up his horse in a corner next to the only monastery in the town, and simply slept next to the horse, there was no other way, who told him that he didn't have money to stay in a hotel. The weather in early spring was still very cold, and Marin didn't bring a blanket with him. In order to keep warm, Marin changed his location and took Carl to the firewood stack behind the church and got into the stack. Fortunately, it was early spring. If it was summer, Marin would not dare to do this. Because there might be snakes in the stack. In his previous life, when he was a child, Marin was playing hide-and-seek with his friends. He opened the stack and saw dozens of snakes coiled together, spitting poisonous tongues at him together, which made people's scalps numb. At this time in early spring, the snakes are still hibernating in deep caves, so he can boldly lie on the stack to sleep. The next morning, Marin was awakened by the sunlight irritating his eyes. In fact, the people in the church had already discovered him, but no one dared to disturb him. Because Marin's clothes showed his identity as a wandering knight. You know, wandering knights are very difficult to mess with. If it were a large monastery with its own guards, it would naturally not be afraid of one or two wandering knights. But this monastery is just a monastery in a small town, with only a few cats in it, and no guards at all. Therefore, they dare not mess with potential thugs like wandering knights. After waking up, Marin shook off the straw on his body, then led his horse to the river, washed his face, and filled the copper kettle with water. Then, he rode into the forest and dug some grass roots to eat for breakfast. Fortunately, this body from the Middle Ages was used to drinking cold water. Otherwise, if it was the modern Marin's body, drinking cold water early in the morning might cause diarrhea. In medieval Europe, diarrhea was also a very difficult disease to cure. At around 8 or 9 in the morning, Marin thought it was time to collect the traps. So he rode his horse to the 3 places where he had set traps yesterday afternoon. The first trap yielded nothing. Apparently, no animal stepped on it. Shaking his head in frustration, Marlin walked towards the second trap. When he reached the second trap, he was pleasantly surprised to find that the grass cover on the trap was gone. Apparently, the trap worked. But to his dismay, the pit was empty. Perhaps an animal stepped on the trap by mistake, but escaped in time before falling into the pit. Damn! How unlucky I am! Marin walked towards the third trap with a depressed mood. When Marin arrived at the third trap, he was surprised to find that the grass cover on the third trap was gone. Obviously, the trap was triggered. When approaching the trap, Marin heard a sharp and funny animal cry coming from the pit. What animal could it be? Marin carefully dismounted and approached with his lance in hand. When he arrived in front of the pit, Marin finally saw the animal in the pit clearly. It was a male sika deer. Why is it male? It's simple, male deer have horns, female deer don't. This red deer is quite big, probably in its prime. After a visual estimate, Marin found that this sturdy male elk was about 130 centimeters tall, 180 centimeters long, and weighed about 400 catties. In his previous life, Marlin had only seen such a tall and strong red deer in the zoo. Now, catching a live one made him overjoyed.